Hi there, everyone. Oh. Okay. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jane. I've been a middle leader now for 8 years. 6 of those have been internationally. Prior to being a middle leader, I've had a number of whole school positions, including Key Stage 3 coordinator, pedagogy lead, and literacy lead. Hoping that today you're going to be able to answer some people's questions about making that step over to middle leaders or making that next step up.
Great, thank you very much, Jane. Welcome to the panel. And following that, Tyla.
Hi, everyone. I am the Director of Teaching and Learning whole school, so all the way from early years to sixth form, and responsible for professional development and appraisal in a large school in Bangkok. I have been a senior leader for almost 15 years or over 15 years, and I am now an aspiring head.
Fantastic, thank you. Next up is Becky Fox.
Hi, I'm Becky Fox. I am also Director for Teaching and Learning, but in a different school in Bangkok. I have been in international education for, I was just working it out, it's nearly 25 years, goodness me. Quite a lot of that in senior leadership. I've been head of 2 schools, preschool through to year 13. My position at the moment is whole school, but I started in early years, so I'm not from a secondary background. I'm from an early years background.
Fantastic, thank you, Becky. Welcome. And finally, John, joining us from Phuket.
Hi everyone, I'm John Fields. Currently, I'm the secondary school principal at UWC Thailand. I've been in international education for 24 years and hold numerous positions. I was also a director of learning whole school, so there's 3 of us on the panel. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome to all of you, and thank you for giving up your time this morning. So you can see we've got a really experienced panel, and it seems being a director of teaching and learning is one excellent step into leadership position for the future. So there's your first tip for the morning. We do have a huge amount that we want to discuss today, and we're hopeful that all of the points that we think will be relevant and useful are exactly the things you're wanting to hear. So I'm going to kick off straight away. Our first section for discussion is about why it matters for more women to join leadership, especially within international education. The statistics in this area are concerning, to be quite honest. Within Fabisia, in our region here of Southeast Asia, 80% of whole school heads are male. The CIS statistics for the whole world, in terms of those that responded to their most recent survey about gender balance in leadership, suggested it was 72% internationally. Both are concerning. The CIS research also said that the pay gap has remained the same since 2017, so very little progress has been made. So the first question is, why does it matter to change this dynamic, and what can we be doing to encourage more women to take that step? So we're going to kick off with John, our only male panel member, to give us his insights into what we could be doing to address this.
Thank you. Those statistics are pretty shocking. They're not surprising, they're shocking. I think any of us who've been in the international world recognize that. I think the gender balance, the importance of the gender balance is huge, I think, for every stakeholder in the school. Primarily, I think it's huge for our students. I think our students need to see a gender balance. They need to see role models. They need to have in the leadership team different people that they can approach, because all of us as individuals feel more comfortable approaching different types of people, and you need that balance of experience, of genders, of outlook on life, so that they see themselves in a leadership position and they can choose who they want to approach. I think it's the same for our staff. I think schools are better when everybody within the school can aspire to something and see a pathway for them to contribute and lead. And I think if those pathways are open to equally to all genders, it gives a better sense in a school of, you know what, we can all do this, we're all in this together, so let's all push forward together. And you need the whole community doing that. So yeah, for me, it's absolutely critical. I'm very lucky to work in a school that has a really good gender balance in leadership, but that's not the norm. So it's just a few of my initial thoughts.
Thank you for that. Jane, as a middle leader, do you think there's a different perspective within middle leadership positions and the dynamics of gender balance there?
Yeah, I mean, I had experience at a previous school where I was actually the only female middle leader in the school. We also, our senior leadership team was all male as well. So I did feel quite outnumbered. And also it kind of put me in a position where I kind of questioned whether I'd be able to move up the next step as well, particularly within that school. It does kind of affect your confidence, but I think it's really important because most of the teachers are female, and we're not getting that balance of voice that is across. And I was able to bring a lot more questions and points across with a different kind of approach to the males that were in the team, which was everybody apart from me. So I think that it's really important that, you know, we have a bigger representation in the middle leaders as well as in the senior leaders, because without having that middle leader step, you can't move up to the next step. So I think it's really important that we start to be able to be seen, like John said, have a variety of different people that are there in those positions that people can go to. I think that is an important thing to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tyla, your school has tried to address this with some sort of structural changes, is that right?
Well, yes. So we sort of when we were looking for a head teacher, when we were recruiting, the school was actively looking for female leaders and found that not many women were actually applying. So it is part of the process is now looking at succession planning. There is a reason why I mentioned that I'm an aspiring head, because I have made it clear to the school that this is where I want my career to progress. And as a result, I am being offered opportunities now, which will allow me to be a well-rounded candidate. And I think that kind of succession planning is really important, thinking about as whether you are an aspiring middle leader or an aspiring senior leader, actually talking about it, talking to those in leadership, saying that you have those aspirations, to promote that balance, because it is traditional that women don't speak up. Men will quite happily, and I know it's very stereotypical, but men will say what they want and what they're aspiring to. Women will wait to be offered. And it's so important that actually we do speak very loudly about the fact that this is what I want, so that the school has opportunities to offer you the kind of steps up towards that role.
Yeah, and I think obviously that's some of the value of the Women's Ed Network is opportunities like today to discuss that, but also to invite people from beyond the network, such as John, to come and talk about what they're actively doing in their schools. So John, in terms of recruiting for senior positions, your middle leaders are involved in that, aren't they?
Yeah, my middle leaders are involved in all my recruitment. And it took about 10 years ago, it took for a middle leader just to come and say to me, John, why aren't you involving us in recruitment? At which point the light bulb went off and I was like, that's the most obvious thing in the world, that I should be involving middle leaders in recruitment. And I have ever since. We also actually involve students in recruitment at the highest levels, which is also great because their perspectives very different often. I think building on Tyla's point, it's the middle leaders actively going to people and saying, I want to be involved in this. I want to be involved in this for this reason. And recruitment's perfect, because if you're involved in that from even initially screening CVs to long listing to all of that, you're part of the process, and the lessons learned from that are huge. It's like being an examiner once. If you mark 150 exam papers, that professional learning's, it might be purgatory doing it, but the professional learning is amazing. It's the same with recruitment. It's such a great opportunity to, and I had an interview yesterday that was about the worst interview I've ever had, but the learning from that was, don't do this. And hey, we've got 4 of the great candidates because the interview was that bad. So I think it's really important the middle leaders ask for those opportunities and grab them and suggest them, and just keep, if your senior leaders don't think that's appropriate, challenging them on that, because being part of recruitment is, yeah, a great professional learning and a great way to learn what not to necessarily do as well.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately advocating for yourself and finding your voice within your school on all levels, on probably everything we're going to talk about today is hugely important. And all of those points sort of lead to, this is slightly backwards, but why we're even here today. In a recent networking event for Women's Ed, we were discussing why it was that so few females were coming forward, and why the applications simply weren't in the inbox when we were recruiting for senior positions. Myself and Becky discussed this more widely, and this is how today came about, because we were like, well, this isn't good enough. There is plenty of fantastic female educators across the world, but especially in Thailand, and we want to see their applications. So what was your experience, Becky?
So we recently went through the recruitment process for a new head of school starting in the next academic year, 2023. I was part of the recruitment panel and I helped long list the applicants. We had over 70 applicants for the position, which is a normal number. And drum roll, there were 11 female applicants, only 11, which was really shocking to me as someone who has been through this process myself, and to find out that backs up the statistics from CIS and Fabricia that Becky was mentioning before. Now, we actually ended up, to sort of go on to the next point, are they strong candidates? Well, my goodness, yes, they were. And we actually ended up having a short list of 3 candidates who came into the school. 2 of those shortlisted candidates were women. And the new head of school who's coming in 2023 is a woman, which is fantastic. But there really were very few applicants. So the question then goes back to, where are all the women, and why aren't they applying for these positions? Do we have the answers here? I don't know. The women who are sitting here are applying for those positions. So what has motivated us to do it? I think one of the things that Tyla was mentioning, and was how I got into senior leadership, was succession planning. And I was very lucky. I'll say I was very lucky, but I think I was in a school that the head was retiring. And so she basically trained me up to take over from her when she retired. So that succession planning was in place. And I think letting the school know, but the school has a responsibility also to ask the teachers, what are your career plans? Not, okay, you need to go on this workshop because you need to know what the next syllabus is for your science curriculum, but what are your professional goals? Where, that question, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? So the school should be asking those questions, not just for succession planning within their own institution, but to develop the middle leaders, to develop the leaders in the school, and maybe they grow their wings and they fly off somewhere else. But that also develops that culture in the school as well.
And just to tap into your experiences working internationally, Becky, have you found that at interview being a mum has come up? Because obviously that's one of the major differentials between male and female candidates. Is that something that you think is asked within international educational interviews?
Yeah. So it was a few years ago, the first time I was leaving the position that I was succession planned into. Obviously, I didn't go through the interview process there. And as John was saying, the interview process for a headship is quite rigorous, and it does involve, you actually usually, I mean, let's pre-COVID, you fly into the school, you go through interviews with the students, with all the stakeholders. And this particular experience was at a school that it was a governing body of all alpha male CEOs of Diageo, Johnson & Johnson, not in education. There was one woman. The school was in Egypt, and there was one Egyptian woman, so representation was there amongst, there were about 10 people altogether. And I was asked, what will your childcare be if we have board meetings until 1 o'clock in the morning, alarm bell straight away? Will you have childcare if your husband isn't in the country? And they did want to know about that, which I don't want to have board meetings till 1 o'clock in the morning. So that was a big no-no anyway, whether I had a child or not. But I was asked that question. And I think that, well, I know that the 3 gentlemen who were there with me were not asked the same question. And I did pass my comments on to the agent who was handling that recruitment. But I think that that's very common. And I think that governing bodies, boards, or whoever's doing the hiring, there are those biases, conscious or unconscious, about women who, we can get pregnant, our children can get ill. Traditionally, if your child is ill, then the mother will be staying at home. You know, there's all of those things that are the governing body brave enough to take that leap, or is it a risky hire? And then you've got to cover maternity leave just in case. So it's all of those things that I think do come into it at the recruitment stage as well, yes.
Yeah. Out of interest, from those of you watching today, can I have a quick show of hands for anyone that has been asked about childcare specifically at interview? Is that an experience that many people have come across? Okay, that's nice. Just one other. Okay, that's good to. Oh no, now people are starting to put more hands up. I spoke too soon. I mean, obviously, we discussed this when we were planning for this event. In that, obviously, in an international context, there is inevitably going to be questions about those people you'll be travelling with, and you know, dependents are part of a package, and so it's quite common to be asked about who you'll be travelling with and what they'll be doing and what they'll be up to. But there is obviously a connotation in terms of asking specifically about childcare. Tyla, what can you do to potentially reduce the chance of applying for a school that's going to ask inappropriate questions?
I think do your due diligence. When I have been looking for leadership positions before, one of the very first things that I do is actually look at the makeup of the SLT. I have in the past applied for schools where every member of SLT was male and white, with potentially one single female SLT who was in charge of inclusion. It's always looking after the special needs. And I have previously applied for those positions, did not even get a foot in a door. And now I know that unless within such schools, if the makeup is heavily male, and there is no diversity within the team, that unless the advert specifically talks about the school wishing to address that lack of balance, I know that there is no point of me applying, because whoever is doing the recruitment is just not, they won't even consider me as a viable candidate. So doing your due diligence, researching the school, are your values similar to the school? Do you know, is your vision for pastoral care, for teaching and learning similar to the school? Because, you know, yes, they might be looking for a change, but if you are not, if what they stand for is not aligned with what you believe in, then you probably won't be successful, but also you will not enjoy working there. And I just wanted to go back for just a moment to what Becky was saying about the sort of speaking to the school, and it's a sort of it's a school's duty to talk about succession planning and asking about career plans. One of the things that we have done is we are now, as a part of regular appraisal conversations, we now ask staff about what are your future plans, tell us, so that we can gather this data and actually plan a lot more effectively. And what we have found as a result is that we have promoted a lot of people internally who we've not even considered before, not because we didn't think they were good candidates, it's just because we didn't consider them as interested in those promotions. So that's been quite a good move.
Just to go to one of the comments from the chat where Laura has asked about how you would deal with responding to questions about childcare and maternity. Obviously, we discussed this in our preparations, and what we decided was that you'd speak openly and honestly about your family situation, and if the school is not willing to support that, it's not the right school, which is really what we're talking about here, finding that good fit and finding a school that fits with your ethos and values. John, the school that you're working at, the foundations of UWC are really ethos and values. So do you find you get candidates that come knowing your ethos and values, and does that make them better candidates because they understand the school context?
Yeah, and we're very clear in interviews. We ask about that a lot, and that's what we focus on more than anything. We do a kind of 3-stage interview process just for teachers. We do a half-hour get to know them as a human being, and a kind of hour-long pedagogy with the wider team, including all the middle leaders and occasionally students, and then with the head of school. And in that first half an hour one, I spend most of the time talking about values, who they are as people, who we are as humans, and that tells me so much more. And maybe this is a hint for later, but I probably screen half of my candidates when I ask the basic, simple question, why UWC Thailand? And the first answer is, oh, it's Phuket, it's in Thailand. At that point, I almost want to hang up the call after 3 minutes, because if they're not talking about the values and what it means to them, and most importantly, what we look for is how they're living the values, because anybody can talk about, you know, I value inclusion and I value this. We always drill down into how are you living that inside and outside of your school, and if those values align, then we talk more about teaching and learning. Our adverts always say we're looking for incredible human beings who also happen to be world-class educators, and we focus interviews in that order. I think going back to a previous point, I think if you're in interviews and you get asked a ridiculous question that we were just talking about, I think as you go further up, it's really important that you see where that question's being asked, because if you've got 4 days of interviews for a principal job and you've had a brilliant set of interviews, and then one person, usually an old male on the board of governors, that is not going to be your direct line manager, asks you a ridiculous question, I think the suggestion of how to answer it, but then coming back to the head of school and talking about that question, you'll very quickly get a sense whether that's a representation of the school or just one person who's been on the board for 20 years and maybe stuck in 1958. So
no, that's a really valid point, John, because obviously the higher up you go, the more people you meet through the interview process, and the more rigorous that process is. Jane, from an applicant's point of view, how do you then actually go about doing that research and that due diligence and finding the right fit?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I remember I've spoken to you before about this, but my first job internationally was in Malaysia, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, that sounds fancy. And I didn't really do enough research about it. I mean, as it happens, I was really lucky. But I didn't know anything about Malaysia. I'd never been to that part of the world. I've never been to this part of the world before. But from that experience, and I was there for 3 years, and then from that experience, I kind of then knew what to look for, the good parts of that school in my next research for the next job. And I knew that I needed particular things, and that's what is really important, is that you understand that the school becomes your family, it becomes your community. And you really need to look into where the school is placed. Like somebody else said, find out about what other teachers are there. So look at their names, see if there's a cross representation of people. Think about how you could see yourself in that particular area where the school is. Think about housing. If you've got family, think about how your family are going to be able to fit in. If you are on your own, and like me, older lady on your own, then you need to think about how you can socially still be able to have a life. The reasons I really enjoyed my time in Malaysia, so much so because it was Southeast Asia, that I came back to Thailand. I knew that I wanted to come back, and I did my research and made sure that I found a school that was very similar actually in the school that I was previously and its setup, etc., because I knew that that was a right fit for me. So I think that research around the school is so important, and the area that the school is in, thinking about the students that are likely to be there as well, because it does become your family. And I think that's really key for your happiness in your job. And if you're happy in there, then you're likely to stay for as long as you possibly can, and then get yourself promoted within the role. So research is key.
Tyla, should I only be applying for jobs I'll definitely get?
Absolutely not.
No.
I think before I answer that question, I just wanted to mention that one of the best pieces of advice that I have ever been given about not getting a job is, remember, if they didn't want you, then you don't really want to work there. Because if they, why would you want to go and work in a place that you don't want to? And that puts a very positive spin on rejection, which hurts. Now, I applied for Headship when I was only an assistant head, but I thought I could do the job watching kind of the predecessor in place. And when I was given a very delicate, no, sorry, you're not ready response from the sort of head, the chair of the panel, I said, that's fine. I did that because a man would. And they laughed, but actually they said, you know what, you're right. A man would just throw their hat in the ring. And I've decided to take exactly the same approach. So the benefit of that is I actually did get promoted. I got deputy headship as a result. I've been offered opportunities that allow me to prepare for headship so that I can apply in the future. So no. Throw your hat in the ring, just take a risk. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get no, but you're also going to get noticed.
I think the opportunity to go through the process of interview is a really valuable one. And yes, as you say, rejection is inevitable as part of the whole recruitment cycle, but you've got to be in it to win it at the end of the day. Research suggests that women will tend to look at the entire job description and basically assume that the school is looking for somebody who's already the full package, but we're all human. That's virtually impossible to be able to fulfill every single bit of criteria. So I think if there's elements to a job description which concern you or you feel could be overwhelming, discuss that at interview, because you also want to know what the school will be doing to support you in that role. You wouldn't want to be left completely in the corner getting on with it on your own. Who's going to be line managing, supporting and offering you the levels of support required for a senior leadership role? Sorry,
if I can just step in, I think it was Sharon Sandberg in Lean In. She said that a man will apply when they only meet 50% of the criteria, whereas a woman will meet 100% criteria and still think, should I apply? Am I really ready? And that's where the throwing hat in the ring really comes in as important.
Absolutely, that's a really scary statistic, 50%, and I'm good enough. And here we are hoping to be 10% braver within Women's Ed and just take that little step towards nudging to 100% of the job criteria. Crazy. So the next section of the discussion is focused on what is really required for a leadership role and what people are looking for within their schools. What are they seeking from the applicants, and how are they going to go about looking for the best person for the job? So Becky, what are you looking for when you are recruiting for middle or senior leadership roles?
The overriding thing for any of those leadership roles is capacity to build relationships, communication skills, those kinds of things. So it's a kind of links with what we were talking about. Do you know how to do everything? And you never do, but all of those skills you can bring to the role. And middle leadership, senior leadership, we work with people, and being able to communicate effectively in all of those different situations with all of those different stakeholders, building really positive relationships, I think are the key things.
Great, thank you. Jane?
Yeah, going on from what Becky's just said, I think collaboration is really important. The idea of people working together and listening to other people. And I think that's something that as women, we're much more likely to do, multitasking. And this is where having children and being mothers is an advantage, because we have got all those other skills, you know, that we can bring into it, being able to multitask, being organised, all those types of things. Think about how we can transfer those skills and putting a twist, if they do ask those questions, putting a kind of a twist on it of showing how we actually can kind of do that. And I think being honest as well. So if there is something that, like you said, you know, if there's something in the advertisement where there's something that you think, I don't quite match that criteria, be honest about that and say that you're interested in support for that, because then I think it shows the school that you're interested in progressing and keeping on that idea of the lifelong journey of learning that we say to our students they should do. That's showing that we're also wanting to do that and we're also willing to keep learning.
Thanks, Jane. Tyla?
It's funny that Jane mentions children, because actually I don't have any, and I think someone else in the chat mentioned, what if you get asked about, you know, not having children. And the thing that I look for is empathy. Considering everything that has happened in the last 2.5 years, going through COVID, so many people struggling through so many issues, being away from family, you know, living through lockdown, empathy is absolutely essential. And also talking about empathy kind of beats that question. You can't tell me, well, you can't relate because you haven't got any children. I might not have children, but I have empathy, and I can imagine what it feels like to have a sick child at home and how to deal with that, and so on. So I want to see, alongside collaboration and building relationships, and empathy.
Thank you. John?
Everything everybody said. Honesty for me is huge. The value fit, vulnerability. I like seeing vulnerability and steps taken because of it. We always ask the question, when was the last time you failed spectacularly? Because we all fail spectacularly, and that ability to be vulnerable and to talk about it. I think it's really important in interviews, if you get asked something, or that you ask interesting questions back, or you challenge in a constructive, in a professional way, but challenge people. Because if you're working with those people for the next 3 years, you need to be able to know that you can challenge each other and be respectful and get on. So I always look for that in interviews. I love it when we get asked difficult questions and we have interesting conversations about inclusion, and it's great. That's what, and it's not the same for every recruiter, and that's what this process is so difficult. I like it when we have those interesting conversations. Others feel, as Tyla I think alluded to earlier, feel challenged by that. And if you have a principal that feels challenged by you as a middle leader, then you don't want to go to that school, frankly, because you'll be frustrated. And the other one is self-care, asking people how they do a really good job, but look after themselves. Because if people are good at looking after themselves, they're good at looking after others generally. And you need that kind of the care of others in a leadership job. So trying to get all of that in an hour interview is tough, but yeah, honesty, value aligned, if big ones too.
From some of those responses from the panel, we can see that it's a lot more about the individual and not necessarily about what's on paper and the qualification. All of that package is clearly important, but all of our panel members today have talked about individual qualities. So having the confidence to be able to put yourself forward as yourself, and that authenticity shines through when you're in an interview. If you are trying to be somebody else, you will very quickly fail, because that charade can only be held up for so long. And yeah, as John said, sometimes you get 4-day interview processes for senior leadership positions. It would be exhausting, wouldn't it, to put across this second persona in that process. So having been through these processes many times collectively as a panel, here's the point where we'd like to hear what you've got to say about making your voice heard, doing a good job for yourself in the interview process, and basically your top tips. I suppose for me, it's just what I've just talked about there, about this idea of having confidence, and having a certain amount of confidence in yourself is only going to be useful in the future if you're in a senior leadership position. So you have to be able to show that through your own personality in the interview. Becky, what are your top tips for getting through this horrible recruitment stage?
So persevere is absolutely the number one, and don't get disheartened, because it is hard. As I said earlier, we had 70 odd applicants. There will be a lot of applications for leadership posts. And if you get through to interview, congratulate yourself, because there's a lot of people, an awful lot of people who didn't. So generally, and with 70, we long listed about 10, and then we went down to 3. So look, I mean, that's the percentages there. So you can congratulate yourself on that. In interview, and also in your letter, we were talking about the skills and things that and the qualities that we're looking for in leadership, but have a little bank of stories and examples of how you have demonstrated those things, and real life examples of things that you're proud of, that they might illustrate empathy, or they might illustrate effective communication, or they might illustrate other things, but so you can pull them out of the hat and really give real life examples of how you demonstrate those qualities. So those are my couple of tips.
Tyla?
I think bank of anecdotes, just like Becky mentioned, a strong female mentor. I am very lucky to have worked in the past with, or just a mentor. It doesn't have to be female, but I was very privileged to work with an amazing person who was a deputy head in a school that I worked in when I was a middle leader, and she has continually pushed me to progress. She goes through all my applications, does mock interviews with me. Bless her, you know, we are now friends, and she still does it, even though we haven't worked together for 10 years. So having someone in your corner who will put in the time to prep you, to guide you, is really important. And then just be honest about your ambitions and what you want. Don't apologize for it. And be you know, and again, Becky, you mentioned that earlier about being authentic. Be yourself. I mean, I will always be a loud, outspoken person. I can't pretend to be quiet, and I don't think I'd manage very long.
And this is again where Women's Ed Network is really valuable and important for all of us. I have a colleague who did seek support from a Women's Ed mentor for her applications, and then was successful in getting a role because she'd had that support, that coaching from somebody not involved in the school she was working in, but could sort of discuss her application in a more open fashion. So do put feelers out and seek out support within the network, because that's essentially what we're here for, to give applicants that confidence to find their voice within this process. Jane, what would you be advising people to do?
Go for it. So if you see a job and you've got 50% of the qualities that they're looking for, still go for it. The men would, so why shouldn't we? I think that's really important to do that, and then just learn from the process. I always think it's kind of a good idea if you're in the school for a while to perhaps even just go through the process, even no intention of leaving the school at some times, so that you've got that experience and experience of interviews, because I think that's quite important to build up your own confidence. And then if you aren't successful, I think a really important thing is to ask for feedback, and to get that feedback clearly, whether it's at interview stage or even pre-interview stage, because there's so many people that are applying for these jobs. It's a good idea to ask for feedback so that you can see where you're going wrong, perhaps with your application that you're not aware of, and then you can apply that to the next job that you're applying for. If it's within the interview, then again you can think about, it might be because you're missing something. You can think about how you can go away and you can work on that in your current school. So I think getting that feedback and acting upon it, giving it a go, is really, really important if you're looking to make that next step.
Yeah, John, is there anything you would add?
They're all great points. I think for me, and it's a kind of process that we do as lifelong learners as we go through, is just being really clear in our own values and beliefs about the different parts of learning. So if you're applying to an IB school or a British school, and you might get a question about what does inquiry mean to you, just knowing those sorts of things. And even if it's different from the norm, so that you have a real clear understanding about where does outdoor education fit in for you in the process of learning, you know, your views on inquiry versus direct teaching, on the role of examinations, on how the university system's so bonkers right now. Just having that, I think, gives you a real clarity, not only on the schools you want to apply to, but just on you as an educator. And then that comes through in interviews, you know, because who knows what questions you're going to get asked. Some people ask, some interviews are very dull and ask the same questions, and some are just, you know, talk to me about the problem with kids coming out of university with $250,000 debt, and how can we begin to address that in secondary schools. I mean, the curveballs from everywhere. But if you know who you are as an educator, and you also know what you don't yet know and that you're working on, that just shows you as a lifelong learner that all of our schools want. So, and yeah, go for it. And also, if you look at the job description and you see things that aren't in there, that's a great question to ask. I noticed in the job description, this wasn't talked about. How does that work at your school? Because sometimes you turn up with job descriptions and the job looks different from those job descriptions. So it's always worth asking.
Just a thought I had as you were talking there, John, is obviously you're very keen to find a real person and get that authentic person. But within international recruitment, a lot of it is done, like we are today, online. So how can you really get to the crux of someone's ethos and values on a screen?
Yeah, my colleague calls it the danger of all bag, no crisp. I think in England we have a different phrase from that, but yeah, people present very differently. That's why we have a 3-stage process. That's why we do a lot of reading of the CVs. That's why we do a lot of asking quite hard questions. It's tough. Like last year, we had some great candidates. We appointed a few, and we made a couple of mistakes based on, I think, perception of people on the screen. It's really hard. I think you just have to do your homework, and you have to read their CVs and ask really key questions. It's nice in the international world that we have colleagues all over the world. So I think asking colleagues about other people is really important. The Googling people, it's just, and it takes endless time. If you got 70 applicants and you're trying to long list, doing that for all is huge. And that's why you need a big team doing it. And that's how you empower your middle leaders, by saying, hey, take these 5 CVs, they're all confidential, have a look, tell me what you think. Use the team at your disposal. But yeah, and I think this is going to continue. I don't think schools are going to be flying in people as regularly, just because the price of aviation fuel right now is too expensive at the moment. So I think this is probably 3, 4, 5 years of mostly online, I would imagine. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important as candidates to realise that is a two-way street. If you don't feel comfortable in the interview, question why that might be. Is it because it's online and it's a difficult situation, or are the questions and the setup and the structure of the interview process not in line with your individual values? Because I think when you're moving to an international role, it's not simply a move of school. Quite often that is a move of your entire life for you and anyone else who's moving with you. So you do that due diligence, as we keep saying, and keep thinking about how those doing the recruiting are representing the place you're potentially going to spend a huge chunk of your working day. So as we move towards the end of our panel discussion, we're going to focus on the presumption that if you're sat here this morning, it's because you want to have some takeaways to think about and begin to prepare for over the summer break, so that you're ready for recruitment, which begins very, very early in the international sector. So there is no time to waste. So Becky, in terms of preparing for that recruitment season that is nearly upon us, what would you be recommending that people spend some time doing over the summer?
There's a few things. I think over the summer, if you have time to read or do a workshop or something like that, keep on learning. So you can really demonstrate you are a lifelong learner. Ask your friends, ask your colleagues if there are any good books around or any good articles, podcasts, that kind of thing, to keep that brain ticking over. have a look at your CV as well, because as Becky says, the recruitment season it's going to start almost as soon as we go back to school. So getting your CV up to date and sharing that with colleagues and friends who are in leadership, and having a, draft up a letter as well to get those stories ready to illustrate some points in your letter. And just go for it. And I think one of the things that I wanted to say earlier when you were saying your sort of top tips, you don't have to act like a man. And we've been saying be yourself, and you don't have to take on what we see as male qualities to go in. You can still own the room or own the Zoom call and be yourself and celebrate all of your wonderful qualities and put yourself forward for that job. One of the things that I do, whether it's on Zoom for an interview or if it's face-to-face, is like they call it the superhero pose. I call it Wonder Woman, and it really does work. So if you are lucky enough to get yourself through to interview, stand there like Wonder Woman with your hands on your hips beforehand, take a few deep breaths, and then you're full of power and off you go.
And I think that the Women's Ed lady with her purple is doing nearly the Superwoman pose. Hands on hips, moving forward. And just in line with what Becky's just said, we've just shared in the chat a Padlet. So if you'd like to access that, there is some recommended reading, some podcasts and books, some hints and tips from the panel that goes a little bit beyond what we've talked about today. So do take a look at some recommended reading on there. Tyla, you've got some reading to recommend for people specifically, haven't you?
I do, but also I was going to say that actually, just as Becky mentioned, before every interview, I do stand there like this. And it does work. It does make you feel a lot more powerful. So yes, I think a really good. There you go.
Sorry, I do it too. So
there you go. And that's the secret.
Yeah.
One book that's absolutely great, and we are actually using it to train up our both middle and senior leaders, Leadership Matters by Bach. It's pretty much a Bible, talks you through every single element of leadership, from developing your vision to embedding that vision in whatever team you're working with, be it a faculty or a whole school. So Leadership Matters, great thing to invest in. Impact magazine from Chartered College of Teaching is brilliant. A lot of the articles are available online for free. Membership for is not too expensive. I don't know how much it is because I'm a fellow, so that's a little bit more. But again, then you get a sort of a termly magazine paper copy that you can go through. Otherwise, you can read online. And then join EduTwitter. There are so many amazing educators. Follow SLT Chat for all things SLT, Head Teachers Chat for all head teachers related sort of queries. Just follow EduTwitter hashtag and you'll come across a lot of amazing educators. Although judging by the names, I recognize a lot of names from Twitter already, so I know you're on there.
I'm seeing hands being raised because I think I'm being warned of the time. There is only 10 minutes left. Hasn't it gone quickly? I just very, very quickly and briefly want to touch on the idea of qualifications, because I think that's something that all of us consider in terms of improving and enhancing our CVs and our own professional development. Obviously, there's lots of options out there in regard to the levels of qualifications that people might have or might wish to do. But we did discuss in our preparations the fact that they all come at a cost. And obviously a lot of the professional qualifications like masters and the NPQs from the UK, they cost money internationally. So what if finance is something you need to take into consideration, and at this moment in time you're not able to do a qualification? What can you be doing instead to maybe fill a gap within your CV? And Jane, you had a great suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky enough, I've just finished my NPQ SL and I've got my master's, But before that and in between that, I've always taken on a project. So looked at the school improvement plan, spoken to SLT and said, I'm really interested in this particular area of the school. Can I lead a project on it? And that's really key then to put into, like somebody said earlier about the idea of having those little anecdotes, those stories that you can talk about in your application and in your interview, to then be able to say, I've led this project, I've led a team of people, not necessarily within your faculty or your area, a whole school project. I've done CPD for other staff in regards to this, and this is the results, and talk through that process. I find that more invaluable CPD than I do any of the courses that I've done, because it's actually hands-on doing it. And it gives you something to really talk about, and then you can see your integrity, they can see your honesty, because you're talking about that process and how you've worked through it. And then it also allows you the opportunity to have a mentor with somebody that's within SLT to be able to give you that feedback and to make sure that you're getting that input. So it's kind of giving you a step in without actually having that step in. I always perhaps volunteer myself a little bit too much for doing things, and then I'm kind of like, oh, I can't cope with everything I'm doing. But I think it's really important to be able to put yourself out there and have that opportunity, and you're helping the students, you're helping the school, and you're helping yourself. So I think that's key. Take on a project.
Great advice, and win-win all round. So yeah, we are drawing to a close. I'm conscious that there are some questions within the chat. So if anyone's got any verbal questions they want to put to anyone in the panel, now would be the time to do so.
We've got one question in the chat that says, it was relating to John's comment from just before. And they said, any advice if you are in a school with a principal who may perceive questions as a challenge?
Can I answer that one? Because I have been in this position. Find your allies. I found that every head, even if they don't like questions, they will have trusted trusted co-workers, and it's those people that you go and align yourself with. You have discussions, you kind of hint at things. I once worked for a head who never accepted any new ideas, so you had to approach it so that they arrived at the idea, so kind of guiding them towards it. So if you're happy working in the school and you're not looking for change, but they see it as a challenge, find people that they do listen to and gently raise those with them. So that's what I would say.
Tilly, you make it sound very political in senior leadership. Why would that be? Sorry, my cynicism shining through there. John, did you want to add something?
Just a quick thing, I think, and it's about when those people are challenged as well. Some people are terrible at being challenged in front of a group, but if you go and talk to them individually, they're way more open-minded. It's always interesting that asking one of those leaders who doesn't like to be challenged to be a mentor for a couple of weeks. Can we have a couple of meetings as I'm looking up? And building that relationship and then challenging is always fun. But yeah, just being mindful of where and how people are challenged, because in front of 100 people, I think as human beings, we generally get quite defensive, especially at the end of the year. So
yeah, and I think that really shows me that empathy as well. That needs to work both ways. I think, if you are in a middle leadership position, it can be frustrating, but you've got to remember that those that you might be looking to challenge are potentially juggling a whole heap of other things going on behind the scenes that you're not aware of. So I think John's point of finding the appropriate time and place to have a proper discussion about it rather than being challenging, it could be a really positive approach to get what you actually want out of the situation. Is there any other questions in the chat that we need to address?
No, I think that's it in the chat. Jackie, you have your hand up. Is there something you wanted to ask or add?
No, that's an old hand, sorry.
An official Zoom term there, an old hand. Is there any of those of you in the audience that would like to ask anything to the panel as we draw to a close? I will presume then that we have covered everything we could possibly have spoken about in an hour.
There's a question. Heidi?
I think it's a thank you. Oh, no, sorry, Heidi. Oh, sorry, because you're waving and you're very small.
Yeah, I wasn't fast enough to get my Zoom hand up, but I just want to thank you so much. It's so lovely to hear all the different perspectives and the advice, and the whole thing about not applying for something unless you feel you check all the boxes. I've certainly seen that in action as well. And as women, we need to put ourselves out there more. So I'm really glad that you organized this event for today. This is very exciting.
Well, thank you for the feedback, and I think we can all agree we're glad that there was something that you could take from it, and it was a positive hour to spend on a Saturday. Any other comments from anybody else?
Sorry, might I ask something, please? I asked the question about asking questions and perceived as challenging, and so this is really personal to me, obviously, but that's the situation I find myself in, and what I fear now is going to apply to other schools. What might the reference say? How do you get past that block? You know, what do you do in terms of references? This is where I'm really worried. If anyone has any tips, I'd be really grateful.
I think I would say that, first of all, make sure that, you know, you do have to give a current head teacher reference, but make sure that your reference is from past head teachers and senior leaders. So pick someone that you worked with previously that you know will give you a good reference. It is not unheard of for some head teachers to be not entirely positive, and there might be always a personal situation. It's something that you might address. You might ask for the reference to be taken after the interview, where you can raise issues in an interview diplomatically, because it's never a good idea to obviously be very negative about your current school in an interview, but you can hint at challenges. However, if your previous sort of references are strong, then that kind of balances it out.
Yeah, I agree with Tyla. Yeah, references are such a funny thing, and I always try and look at 5, 6, or 7 of them just to get a sense. And there's often in 7 people one that's just not. And I agree that the diplomatic, and I always try and I like people who frame that around values, that my values currently don't align with where the school's going, so I'm looking for a shift. That takes away the personality, it takes away all of that. You can talk about my educational values fit this better and not that. That's always positive. But yeah, don't, as Tyla said, don't go down and badmouth your head. But it's also in the international world, there is I think people know the great heads, and people know the heads that are getting there, and people know the heads that have been around maybe a bit too long. So that helps when we look at references as well. So
yeah, I think the Fabicia network means that, yeah, people's names and reputations sometimes precede them. So, you know, many times you might have a range of references from a number of schools if you've been in the region for a while. So, you know, I think all of that is hopefully reassuring to you that, yes, references are one part of the process, but they're not the entirety of it. And one single reference, I think if the school was dismissing you as a great candidate based on one person's feedback, they're potentially missing the point of the rest of the process. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Okay, it is exactly 10:30. I think some of us would be happy to stick around if there was further questions, or if you did want to ask anything more. But if you feel like you've got everything you needed from this morning, then thank you for joining us and giving up an hour. And hopefully everyone's found something useful. Do use the Padlet and go back to that. You now have access to it, and we'll hopefully keep refreshing it with some additional things that have come up from today. But there is also the Women's Ed Network, and that's what part of today is about, to kind of raise the profile of that wonderful network, because it's brought us here today to bring this wonderful panel together to discuss their experiences. But there's heaps of other people within the Facebook and the Twitter that can also lend their support and then some advice to those of you looking to seek a promotion within the next recruitment season. So best of luck with your applications, and please keep in touch. Thank you. This is that awkward bit now. No one knows what.
Thank you. Bye.
Stay, do we go?